Thomson is going to argue that claim 4 is false, that the right to life does not always outweigh the right to decide what happens in and to one's body. The way she is going to do this is by painting us a picture, describing a scenario that has nothing to do with pregnancy, but describing a scenario in which the right to life does not outweigh the right to decide what happens in and to one's body, in which she thinks this is clear. It is clear that the right to life doesn't outweigh the right to decide what happens in and to one's body in this imagined scenario that she's going to give us. She is then going to argue that this imagined scenario is analogous to pregnancy. And so, given the fact that in this scenario, the right to life doesn't outweigh the right to decide what happens to one's body, given that these two things, that the scenario is analogous to pregnancy, we can then conclude that in the case of pregnancy, the right to life of the fetus does not outweigh the mother's right to decide what happens to her body. Right, so the basic movement, and we'll return to this after we look at this scenario, the basic movement of thought is, here's this scenario. In this scenario, the right to life does not outweigh the right to decide what happens to one's body. This scenario is analogous to pregnancy, and so in the case of pregnancy, the right to life of the fetus does not outweigh the mother's right to decide what happens to her body. That's the movement of thought. Now, what is this scenario? The scenario is that of the violinist, and this is one of the most famous thought experiments in all of philosophy, not just within the abortion debate, but within all of philosophy. This thought experiment is incredibly famous. Anybody who studies ethics, anybody who's taken a class in ethics, basically, has probably heard of this thought experiment. The Violinist. There it is there. You can read it if you like. Read it? Okay, good. No. I'll kind of run through it now. We'll describe how it's working. All right. You wake up in the morning and find yourself back to back in bed with an unconscious violinist, a famous unconscious violinist. He has been found to have a fatal kidney ailment, and the Society of Music Lovers has canvassed all the available medical records and found that you alone have the right blood type to help. They have therefore kidnapped you, and last night the violinist's circulatory system was plugged into yours, so that your kidneys can be used to extract poisons from his blood as well as your own. The director of the hospital now tells you, look, we're sorry the Society of Music Lovers did this to you. We would never have permitted it if we had known, but still, they did it, and the violinist now is plugged into you. To unplug you would be to kill him. But never mind, it's only for 9 months. By then, he will have recovered from his ailment and can safely be unplugged from you. Now, is it morally incumbent on you to accede to this situation? And so what Thomson is asking, is it morally incumbent on you to stay hooked up to the violinist in this way for 9 months? Thomson never says directly what her answer to that question is, but it's very clear she thinks the answer is no. You do not have to stay hooked up to the violinist. You would not be doing anything immoral were you to unplug. And so that question, is it morally incumbent on you to accede to the situation you see in front of you right now? No, it's not. Clearly, it's not. That's what Thomson is arguing. Continuing on with the thought experiment, with the scenario. No doubt it would be very nice of you if you stayed hooked up to the violinist like this. But do you have to, Thomson? No, you don't. It is not morally required for you to stay hooked up to the violinist. Well, what if it were not 9 months, but 9 years? Or longer still, what if the director of the hospital says, tough luck, I agree, but you've now got to stay in bed with the violinist plugged into you for the rest of your life? Because remember this, all persons have a right to life, and violinists are persons. Granted, you have a right to decide what happens in and to your body, but a person's right to life outweighs your right to decide what happens in and to your body. So you cannot ever be unplugged from him. I imagine you would regard this as outrageous, which suggests that something really is wrong with that plausible sounding argument I mentioned a moment ago. The plausible sounding argument that she has in mind is the pro-life argument that we looked at in the previous video. And so what she's saying there is that this scenario, this thought experiment, is supposed to show that there's something wrong with that plausible sounding argument. So here's that plausible sounding argument again, right? This is just what we saw in the previous video. And as we know, Thomson is taking aim at premise 4. The violinist argument, what we just saw there, is supposed to show that premise 4 is false. And you can begin to see, I think, how that works. Premise 4 says something like, the right to life outweighs the right to decide what happens in and to one's body. Well, what Thomson could say in reply to that is, well, look at this violinist scenario, this violinist thought experiment. The violinist has a right to life. You have a right to decide what happens in and to your body, sure. Does the violinist's right to life outweigh your right to decide what happens in and to your body? Now, typically, in most circumstances, a violinist's right to life and your right to decide what happens to your body, those aren't going to conflict, right? The violinist goes off doing his thing, you go off doing your thing, there's no conflict. But in this imagined scenario, there is a conflict between those two rights. If you unplug from the violinist, you decide to do that with your body, yeah? You decide not to let the violinist use your kidneys to extract the poisons from his blood. Well, you would be killing him. That would be tantamount to killing him, to violating his right to life. So we have a conflict between the violinist's right to life and your right to decide what happens in and to your body. Conflict. And what the violinist thought experiment is supposed to show is that the violinist's right to life does not outweigh your right to decide what happens into your body. Despite the fact that the violinist has a right to life, you can still unplug. It is morally permissible for you to unplug. You are committing no injustice against the violinist by unplugging from him. That's what the scenario is supposed to show, right? But you might be wondering, or the pro-life person might then suggest, well, that's all fine and good for violinists when you wind up in a scenario like this, but I don't care much about that. I care about pregnancy. I care about fetuses being hooked into mothers, right? Not about violinists and whatever. And so you've got to do something to show me that there's something wrong there, that the right to life of the fetus doesn't outweigh the right to life of the mother, the right to decide of the mother. And Thomson would say, well, look, what's doing the work there is the fact that the violinist scenario is analogous to pregnancy. It's for 9 months. You're hooked into the person. We're granting the fetus as a person, recall, and that's the way that this is analogous. The violinist is like the fetus. And Thomson, for the sake of argument, is granting that the fetus is a person. And so her kind of stand-in, her analog for the fetus is a violinist, someone who's clearly a person, right? Even though they're a person, you can still unplug from them. Well, Thomson is arguing, same can be said of the fetus because these two scenarios are analogous. Let's take a little bit closer look at the structure of the argument, right? This is kind of contained in what I've already been saying. Here's the movement of thought. Here's how it's supposed to be working. We get the description of this story about the violinist. In philosophy, we call these things thought experiments, right? They're experiments, but you don't actually go out in the world and do the thing. You just think about it. It's all up here, right? It's all in your head. It's a thought experiment, all right? So we get this story about the violinist that I just read to you. Okay, fine. That's all well and good. But the really important thing is that we draw out an intuition from it. Thomson doesn't call it an intuition, but again, in philosophy, that's what we call this thing. So we tell this story and we draw out a claim from it. We draw out an intuition. This story is designed to elicit a certain belief or thought from us. And in the case of the violinist, it's supposed to elicit from us the idea that it's morally permissible to unplug from the violinist, right? So when she stops and asks those questions, is it morally incumbent for you to accede to, is it morally incumbent on you to accede to this situation? What she's doing there is she's trying to kind of pump this intuition, we would say. She's trying to get us to say, no, it's not. It's morally permissible to unplug. That's the intuition she's drawing out, right? She also says something like, or she's getting at something like this when she says, it'd be outrageous to say that you have to stay plugged in or whatever it might be, right? So that's the intuition. Now, as I was just describing, somebody might say, well, that's all well and good, but what do I care about that? This is a far-fetched scenario. It's probably never going to happen. Medical technology, whatever, right? Not going to happen. So who cares if it's morally permissible to unplug from the violinist? Well, we should care if we're interested in the ethics of abortion, according to Thomson, because what we then do is apply this intuition to an issue that we are interested in. So we're not really interested in what is permissible to do if you're kidnapped by the Society of Music Lovers and they hook you into this violin, right? That's not going to happen. That's not something that we're interested in, really, or that we should spend much time thinking about just in its own right or for its own sake. What we are interested in, however, is the issue of abortion. And we should think about this violinist story, Thomson would say, insofar as it sheds light on the ethics of abortion. And how does it shed light on the ethics of abortion? Well, precisely in the way that we just see up there on the screen now. From that story, we draw out this intuition that it's morally permissible to unplug oneself from the violinist. And then we apply that intuition to the issue we're interested in. We apply that intuition to abortion. And in Thomson's view, the violinist scenario is analogous to the scenario of pregnancy. And so just as it's permissible to unplug from the violinist, so too it's permissible for the woman to unplug, so to speak, from the fetus, which is to say, abortion is morally permissible. Now, a lot of work is being done in this last little arrow there, this last bit that I've replayed for you. The application of this scenario to the issue of abortion. And we're going to see in a subsequent video that this is one of the areas or one of the moves in the argument that critics, that people who disagree with Thomson, who think Thomson is wrong, this is one movement of the argument that critics have latched onto, and they've denied that this works. They've denied or tried to deny that this intuition that this thought experiment is analogous to pregnancy. And we'll consider that in due course later. You might think at this point, however, well, yeah, of course it's not analogous. There's all kinds of things that are different. And a lot of the initial reactions we might have, I'd like to try to convince you of, are not quite to the point. So, what often trips students up is the fact that Thomson goes on to talk about, well, what if it's not for 9 months? What if you have to say bedridden for 9 years or your whole life or something like that? And you want to say, well, that's not how pregnancy works. It's not for 9 years. What Thomson, don't read too much into that. What she's getting at there is that for all that the pro-life argument shows, if pregnancy were to last for 9 years, the pro-life position would be committed to saying you have to stay plugged in for 9 years. If pregnancy lasted a lifetime somehow for whatever, right? The pro-life position, right, given the fact that it considers the fetus a person and persons have a right to life, and given the fact that the pro-life position has put forward this idea that the right to life always outweighs the right to decide what happens to your body, the pro-life position would be committed to saying you have to stay plugged into the fetus for your whole life, right? Given the moral claims made by the pro-life position, it would make no difference whether or not pregnancy is 9 months, 9 years, or a whole lifetime. That's what Thomson is gesturing towards there. Don't read too much into it. It doesn't matter that much. You might say, here's another disanalogy. In the violinist thought experiment, you have to stay in bed for 9 months with the violinist, yeah? That's not how pregnancy typically works. Typically, pregnant women are up and about and doing whatever it is that they do, right? They walk around. They're not in bed for 9 months. The idea here is that Thomson would say, yeah, but that's irrelevant. There are plenty of pregnancies where a woman is bedridden, if not for all 9 months, maybe for the majority of the pregnancy at least. It can happen. There can be medical complications where a woman's doctor will assign her to bed rest for her pregnancy, right? So she will be confined to the bed for 9 months. Okay. It's not as though a pro-life person is going to say, oh, well, if you get if you have to be in bed for 9 months, then you can go have an abortion. That's not the pro-life position, right? The pro-life position is going to say, even if you are assigned to bed rest because of medical complications and so on for 9 months, even if that happens, you still can't have an abortion, right? The fact that you're up and about and walking around, the fact that you're consigned to your bed, that's morally irrelevant with regard to the ethics of abortion, a pro-life person would say. And so Thomson would say the mere fact that most pregnancies don't require bed rest for all 9 months, that doesn't matter. That's not a relevant disanalogy between the violinist scenario and your typical pregnancy. Because the pro-life person, because even if we fix that disanalogy, right? It's not as though the pro-life person would say, it's not as though the pro-life person would say, now all of a sudden abortion is permissible, right? That's kind of Thomson's point. So that's not a relevant disanalogy. One last thing, a more kind of perhaps important disanalogy. And it's a disanalogy that other philosophers, critics of Thomson, have picked up on. It's not going to be the one that we're going to look at later, but it's a disanalogy that other philosophers have picked up on. The scenario that Thomson lays out with the violinist, in that scenario, you get hooked up to the violinist completely and entirely against your will. You go to bed in your bed one night and you wake up in the morning and you're hooked into the violinist. You didn't choose, you didn't sign up for it, you didn't do anything that would have resulted in you winding up hooked up to the violinist. When it comes to pregnancy, then, the relevantly analogous case, it would seem, would be pregnancies that result from forcible intercourse, from involuntary intercourse, right? That would be the relevant analogy, and most pregnancies aren't the result of that. That's not how most pregnancies that would result in abortion, that's not how most pregnancies come about. Most pregnancies are the result of voluntary intercourse. And so it seems that Thomson's scenario, the violinist thought experiment, really seems to be analogous just to pregnancies that are the result of rape. And Thomson herself acknowledges this. This, however, is not a very good response to Thomson. The violinist thought experiment comes on the second or third page of a 20-page article. She has much more to say. She acknowledges that the violinist thought experiment really seems to just be analogous to pregnancies that result from involuntary intercourse. She has other arguments that are designed to deal with pregnancies that result from voluntary intercourse. And so we'll look at those the other argument that she gives, the argument she gives to kind of fill this hole in a subsequent video. But the point presently is the objection that Thomson is only concerned with or only shows that abortion is permissible in cases of rape, not a good objection. She's got a whole lot more to do. There are more arguments, and there are arguments that are supposed to deal with that.